Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to this iteration of the Modern Change Academy, where we're going to be focusing on change models and flow, how we can help you get from 0 to 1. My name is Kalen Castello. I'm an outbound product manager within ITSM. With me today, I have Daniel Davidson, the inbound product manager for change, and we'll be leading you through this session. We'll do a little bit deeper intros in just a second, but before we jump into it, I do have to show this safe harbor notice. There are going to be some things that we may talk about in this presentation that are forward-looking. Please know that those are kind of based on our best understanding of factors at this time, but those things can change, so don't take anything that's forward-looking as set in stone. All right, from an agenda standpoint, we're going to do introductions first. Then I'm going to take us through what we commonly hear from customers like you around your challenges and kind of the core outcomes you're looking to achieve through your change process. Then we're going to talk about our perspective on a modern change solution and our latest iteration of the maturity journey that we're working through to help you get there. And then we're going to dig into the meat and potatoes of this presentation, talking about change models, talking about moving from workflow to flow, and then a few demos related to that, and then ending with recommendations and Q&A. Okay, intros. I'll go first since I'm talking.
Hayden, I think we got a hand up, but it might have gone back down.
Oh, we got a hand up already. Let's see.
Teresa? Was it a... No,
I don't see the hand up anymore. Okay. Oh, no, there's a hand up. Oh, it's gone. Okay.
People just testing the buttons.
Good. I'm glad to see that. All right, intros. So my name's Kalen Castello. Like I mentioned, I'm an outbound product manager with ITSM. Been in ServiceNow for about 3 years now. Done a variety of things while I've been here, but most recently focused on our service resilience products. So speaking to a lot of customers like you about things around modern change, so change management and DevOps change velocity, as well as release, our new release management product, digital product release. And with me, I have Dan. Dan, I'll hand it over to you.
Hello, so my name's Daniel. I look after the change and SLM products from an inbound product point of view. So that means I'm responsible for the roadmap and the innovation, the engineering behind them. And I work with Kalen, who's the outward face of change management. Been with ServiceNow over 10 years, working in implementation, did a lot of change management implementations, led the teams doing ITSM in Northern EMEA and led the architects out of UK, and then joined the product teams a few years ago. So yeah, Kalen. I just there are a couple of hands up. I don't know if they're real hands up. Paloma, you've got your hands up as well. I think we'll probably just press on unless there's anything urgent. Or
yeah, I think so. This will help with this housekeeping slide, I think, to set some.
We will have time at the end, right? As it says there.
For sure, definitely have time at the end. So, like it says here, we'll have time at the end for Q&A. Love to see the hands coming up now. It'll probably be a little hard for us to do that throughout. Actually, maybe Dan, you can stop me if you see any that are persistent. We can stop and answer any questions then. But in the meantime, please use the Q&A functionality within Zoom to ask questions, and we'll either save those for the end to talk about live, or we'll answer them in the chat so everybody can see the answers there. This presentation is also going to be recorded and shared to community. So if you need to reference it later or share it with a colleague or a peer, you can do that on community. It'll be up in about a week. And then after the event, we have a short survey. We'd love hearing your feedback, so please fill that out. Paloma, I'm going to actually allow you to talk since your hand's up. Do you have a question? You should be able to talk. Okay, I'm just going to press on then. Okay, so let's kick this off with a poll. Give me one moment. I'm going to launch this poll. Okay, if you've been a part of our Modern Change Academies, you've probably seen this question before, but we like to ask it. What does modernizing change mean to you? Is it increasing automation? Is it managing a higher volume of change? Is it enabling changes to happen faster, having more accurate risk, better experience for your requesters and change approvers and implementers? Is it moving to a more federated process? It's a multiple choice question, so it could be everything. It might be everything. Very likely is everything. Give this just another 5 seconds. All right, I'm going to end it here because I think the trend is clear. All right, sharing results. So as you can see, and is what we expected, it's a pretty, even spread across these different outcomes. But we often see that a better experience for requesters and other folks in the change process is a big one. And here in this group, increasing automation is big as well. Okay. So what do we hear from customers like you? In the many one-on-ones and one-to-many engagements that we've had with customers, we've heard some clear themes around challenges that they face as they try to keep up with faster development cycles and new governance and regulatory requirements. The first theme is related to the need to balance a desire for increasing the velocity of their change, so how fast the process changes, with their imperative to maintain stability, quality, and compliance around their estates. So customers are only ever seeing an increasing volume of change year over year. I think a stat that Dan shared with me is that a lot of our customers are seeing change roughly double year over year. So a lot of more changes every year. And that's due to more distributed product development, adoption of DevOps, greater product complexity, a number of factors. And organizations want to handle this increased volume without a proportionate increase in the volume of incidents that they see. And they also want to comply with their enterprise GRC requirements as well. Additionally, because many quality and compliance checks are validated only once changes are made to production or just before they're being deployed to production, customers often experience avoidable fire drills in that period of validation just before deployment that could have been more proactively remediated. So they're thinking about how do we automate some of those checks? How do we shift them further left in the process? The second theme is around a common desire to evolve, but we often find that inertia within organizations can hold customers back. So existing stakeholders are often hesitant to adapt and disturb what works. Change has been around for a while and it's been working for a while. Why do we need to change it? Next, particularly for customers who have legacy implementations of change, we see a lot of waste in their process due to over-customized, arduous systems and processes that have grown to try to accommodate kind of so much, and as a result have become a black box and are really daunting to change. And the waste around these processes puts additional pressure on budgets. And finally, the third theme is around transitioning from feeling to a more data-driven form of governance and around decisions. So for change in particular, the lack of traceability to the right data to a change request can slow down approval decisions. Additionally, without a holistic view of a change's impact, assessing risk can often be subjective, and identifying failed changes that cause incidents or outages is difficult. So without proper data, organizations are heavily held back in their ability to define policies and enable automation over their change process. So these challenges are keeping a lot of organizations in what can feel like a break-fix loop. So things are breaking and you're just rushing to fix them, holding them back from being able to actually scale their business, deploy innovations faster, and manage costs more efficiently. And this is where we think modernizing one's change management process can be helpful. Okay, another poll. Oh, I never stopped sharing that. Okay. I'm going to launch this next poll. This poll is related to the first and related to what I just talked about, but are you feeling the pressure to modernize your change from your business? If so, what's the cause of this imperative? Again, this is multiple select. And second question here is, what's the biggest challenge you face in modernizing change? What's holding you back, if anything, is around getting to a more modern change process? Give you all about 20 more seconds to respond here. Let's see a Q&A. Hey, Dan, you got that one. Thanks. End the poll. Share. Okay, so it looks like in terms of pressures to modernize, it's, again, as we expect, a lot of these different things that we're talking about. Business expecting faster time to market, needing to respond quicker when things are found to be vulnerable, increasing focus on compliance. But the challenges that this group faces mostly is around awareness of features and information. That will definitely be helpful this session. It's one of our core focuses. And then buy-in from different personas and in alignment. That is a harder challenge, but we also hear that quite often from a lot of folks. Okay. moving forward. So what is our modern change solution from ServiceNow's perspective? We believe that by taking a federated model approach to change, we can enable change, which, as I mentioned, is often overburdened and complex, particularly for legacy implementations, to be broken up, simplified, and better fit your business requirements. This not only helps increase the throughput of change by allowing teams to move faster and leverage automation, but it also will help improve stability by right-sizing the governance over your change process and reducing the burden that a lot of customers have over their normal change process in particular to accommodate so many things. So how can you achieve change modernization? Shown here is our perspective on an outcome-focused customer maturity journey for change. This is our latest iteration of this. You might have seen a different version of it in a prior session, but we keep trying to evolve this and make it more useful and impactful for you. The top portion of this visual represents the outcomes at each maturity stage that can be achieved, and the bottom boxes in red represent the data that we believe should be available to you at each of these stages to leverage. I'm not going to go through this thing in super great detail here. I think we'll have probably a follow-up session on this specifically as we refine this and nail it down. But I do want to mention that we are planning to build really more detailed prescriptive FAQs and guidance that align to this maturity journey for our customers to reference as they embark on this modernization journey. So keep an eye out for that. We'll make sure that it's published to community once we have it. It's work in progress right now, though. At a high level, through this maturity journey, we aim to help customers with legacy change implementations visualize how they can move to adopt the latest and greatest features within change, while at the same time not impacting their business operations and realizing value over time incrementally. And this all starts with really evaluating what you have today for change. So evaluating your as-is process, identifying use cases where you can begin experimenting with some of these new change features like models, flow, approval policies, just to get more familiar with what's available and what it can do. It then moves into expanding the use from those initial use cases to more use cases, so you can begin to kind of reduce the technical debt over your ITIL change types that you have. And you can begin planning, building, and testing the migration of your change types to models over time. And once you have that foundation of everything built upon models and with flow, it's then all about building upon the data available to you to use in your change process to drive automation. So you can use things like scheduling data, risk data, operational data around the change, so things like incidents and outages. You can look at historical performance of your change process through success scores. You can even use things like engineering data if you bring in that data into ServiceNow. And you can pull all of that data into more robust approval policies that help drive automated governance over your change process. And that's kind of several stages in the middle here of this journey. Along the way, we also recommend thinking about simplifying your change process by looking at products like digital product release, which we think pairs really well with change. We see a lot of customers typically stuff a lot of validations in their change process by virtue of not having a full release process for a lot of their software changes in particular. So how do you set up a release process where you do a lot of the validations when they actually are relevant in the phases of your release and development versus having to do them all just before change? And by the end of this journey, we want customers to get to a point of having a nearly fully automated change process from creation through approval, as well as the ability to leverage some of our more kind of optimization focused capabilities like Gen AI recommending future models or templates for you to consider to accelerate your process even further. So that's at a high level. But like I said, we're going to talk more about this probably in a future session. Okay, one more poll. There will be one more after this as well. Okay, this one's just around getting an understanding of your familiarity with change models. Are you aware of it? Have you used it? Have you used them for a while? Are you getting started? You have no idea what it is? Okay, I already got great responses. Okay, so it looks like a little less than half are getting started or already using models. Some have been using it for a while. That's great to hear. A lot do not know what models are, haven't heard of them. So that's great. That's what this session will help with. Okay, so let's talk about two key components of getting started with our modern change solution,
Kaylin,
change
it's just worth
models.
calling out. At
Yeah,
21% saying they've not heard of change models. We have do we have a slide at the end that points people back towards the
we do.
community site and
We
yeah,
do.
head that way. Because
Yeah.
this is like an add-on to those sessions we did last year. So if you're one of those 21%
Okay.
who said they never heard of change models, head to the link at the end of the presentation and have a look around. We've got plenty of material. Sorry, Kaylin,
Yeah.
go on.
No, that's great. Yeah, as Dan called out, we did a launch and learn series last year that's on community that really digs into each of these things in a lot of detail. We're going to talk about models and flow and good detail here, but there's more introductory sessions that we have already posted. Okay, so first I'm going to talk about models, but what you actually see here aren't models. These are ITIL change types that likely you know quite well. Standard change is around low risk, repeatable changes that are pre-approved. Emergency change is for low or no lead time changes, so fix on fail, fix or fail situations, typically done after the fact. And normal change is really accommodating everything else. It's a pretty robust process, typically has the most layers of approval. Traditionally, within ServiceNow, these types of changes, the ITIL change types, have had many technical artifacts associated to them. So there's a state model defining the relevant change states that it progressed through. There's templates that you can define that help populate frequent data within these use cases for these changes. And there's a workflow to help facilitate the process of these change types, which calls on things like business rules, et cetera, to trigger things outside of the workflow, and it as well contains the tasks and approvals that are executed throughout the change process. The primary challenge with these legacy change types that run on workflow is that they're each all incorporated in a singular monolithic workflow. So all of these different technical artifacts are incorporated into that workflow. And that workflow has become often highly customized and complex and difficult to maintain. And this directly leads to kind of a black box feeling that I mentioned earlier, and it makes it hard for customers to adapt their process. So today in practice, many organizations will have a number of change use cases sitting within their legacy change types. Normal change has the most. It contains things like patching, infrastructure, application, low risk changes, more than this as well. With standard change, we've seen a lot of customers use standard change for DevOps changes as well, even though we think DevOps changes probably should exist outside of standard change just because they aren't necessarily low risk or repeatable. There probably should be a level of governance over those. And within emergency change, we also see customers use that for unauthorized change. And what this has meant for a lot of organizations is they've attempted to adjust the logic of these change types in that large, complex workflow to accommodate all of these use cases, making them ever more complex, overburdened, and ultimately fragile and hard to touch and modify. So where do customers move from here, if this sounds like you? This is where change models can help and shine. So here on this slide on the left, you see the model versions of those same ITIL change types. Note that they're a little bit smaller than the circles we had in the prior slide. The relative size of the circle represents the relative amount of changes we think that should fit into this model. And on the right side of this are some federated use case examples of models for other well understood change use cases. With change models, what we allow customers to do is create fit for purpose models for well understood use cases and separate them out from the legacy change types, thus simplifying those legacy change types in the process. So think of this as making normal and standard change smaller and needing to accommodate less, thus making them simpler and easier to maintain. And at the same time, the separated use cases that we define can move through their own processes more quickly as they only contain the relevant change states, transition criteria, approval policies, and automation that fit that use case. So today out of the box, we provide the three ITIL change types, change models that you see on the left. And these can be leveraged to initially transition to models and flow from workflow over time. And as for federated models, we provide a few examples out of the box as well, things like change registration, cloud infrastructure, unauthorized, and DevOps. One thing that's really important to note here before I move on is that change models can be used in conjunction with your legacy change types, meaning you don't have to cut over and use models all at once, which would make adopting them, I think, quite difficult for many customers. In fact, what we see and expect is that most customers transition over time to use models. Typically, we see them first starting with a pilot or POC of a specific use case And then as they prove the efficacy of that use case with some teams, they can then expand the use of that model and then look at other use cases for models. And over time, through that, reduce the burden on normal standard change, making them easier to ultimately migrate from. One thing to call out here is that change models within them, and you'll see this in the demo, have role-based access controls. So as you define those initial POC use cases, you can actually restrict the use of those models to certain user groups within the platform, or assignment groups as well, so that you can test it out with specific teams that you want to before rolling it out more broadly. So it's really common for organizations to keep using their legacy change workflows as they do this migration to models, because standard, emergency, and normal are really critical for business operations. And over time, as you simplify the use of those workflows, you can get to a point where you're at a state where you can migrate them to Flow. Okay. So just to dig a little bit deeper into the anatomy of a model, within change models themselves, like the legacy change types, there's artifacts. The primary difference, though, with models is that these artifacts are not directly embedded into a complex workflow. Instead, models and their artifacts are modular. So change managers would define the change process within the model itself. So that's where you define the states that the model can move through, the transition criteria between those states. Separately from that, you define the flows that execute automation for certain states. And separately from that, you define the approval policies that can be called from flows as well. So flows and approval policies, as well as models, are modular, and flows and approval policies can be shared across models. So you can duplicate them and modify them. And what this does is it just makes maintaining and updating the different components of a change process or a change use case much easier, as opposed to trying to figure out what you need to modify in a very large workflow. One additional benefit of models is that they can also better facilitate the capture of structured data for particular use cases. A really good example of that is the DevOps change model that we provide out of the box. This model would be used when changes are created automatically from DevOps change velocity via pipeline executions. And what it does is it helps associate a lot of that DevOps data to change requests for auditability's sake and traceability. And what this data then provides is the ability to reduce MTTR if an issue occurs, just by virtue of having that commit data and planning data and security and test data to those changes. So it just helps with MTTR. And it can also be used to automate the change approval process further, like I mentioned, by using a lot of that data in approval policies as well. All right. Last slide I have here on models, just to explain kind of how they work and visualize this for you. This shows a view of different change models, as well as use cases and examples of applicable change states for those models. So in a normal change model, you progress through kind of all of the typical change states from new, assess, authorize, schedule, implement, review to close. But for a use case like change registration, where you're just registering a change that kind of a third party is making that you don't have control over, so it's really more for visibility, you don't really need all those states. You just have 4 states that are needed: schedule, implement, review, and close. So it's readily apparent that if you have fewer states, that helps accelerate the change process. But important to note with these models, because they're fit for purpose, they also progress more quickly by the virtue of the transitions and policies that you define relevant to them, and how it can work with the data within those change use cases themselves. Okay, going to the final poll. And this is a poll about flow. So flow is the other really critical piece that fits with, well, flow and approval policies that fit with modernizing change and moving to models. So I just want to understand your familiarity with flow, how it compares to workflow. We talked about it a little bit, but we're going to have one slide, I think, that goes into better detail on it.
Kaelan, just a quick question came up in the Q&A while you were talking. So are we sharing this deck?
We can, yes. I think it'll be posted to community as a PDF. All right, I'm going to end this poll and share the results. So it looks like we have about, what was that, 30% of folks who are using Flow or that they're in the process of migrating to Flow. Most 40% do not use Flow, but they're looking to migrate to flows from workflow. So that this is what the rest of our presentation will be relevant to that. A couple 20% haven't heard of Flow, and some aren't looking to migrate just yet. Okay. So let's talk about workflow and flow, and the difference between the two and what it would take to think about migrating. So a critical step in modernizing one's change process within ServiceNow is moving to a more federated way of conducting change and realizing the most out of models is to migrate away from workflow to flow. Boom, here's a visual of what workflow looks like in the platform. Workflow was a really powerful capability in what it was able to do, but truly it was a little bit cumbersome in how it was structured and visually displayed, as well as it was difficult to modify and maintain. So on the left here, you'll see an example of what a simple workflow looked like. This is what the out-of-the-box emergency flow was. And this is before any customer modified this, configured it, customized it based on any requirements. Now just extrapolate that to having this implemented for a decade, all these new requirements come in over time, and you keep modifying and making this even more and more complex. I struggle to understand what's going on in the simple form. Just imagine for some customers what it looks like after a decade. So this complexity has what made modifying workflow such an arduous task for many customers, and why it's hard for them to kind of adapt their change process to the more modern ways of working that we're seeing today. So now let's compare this to our modern change solution, leveraging models, flow, and approval policies, and how it's architected. So starting with models, each change model contains the process over which a change will go through. So models contain the states and how those states can transition from one another, whether that be manual or automated. So if the automation is simple, like waiting for a certain field to be populated, that can be managed within the state transition conditions themselves in the model. But if the automation transition is more complex, like needing to call on approval policies or waiting for completion of several tasks, that's where flow becomes relevant. So it's important to note that not every change model or this transition between states within a model will need a flow associated to it. In fact, most don't. For example, typically at the new state, when you want to move to authorized, you want the user to submit a button saying request approval. So you don't really need a flow there. But typically we see the assess, authorize, and implement states use a flow to automate, and other states are sufficient with either manual transitions or simple automated transitions defined within the model themselves. For assess and authorize, flow is where approval policies are called and applied to changes. And for implement, flow is used to check for the completion of all implementation tasks. And once those are all completed, it'll move it to review. The best practice around flows is what we call state-based flows. So you want to define flows specific to both a change model and also the specific state in that model. And what this does is it makes it so that when you update and maintain adjustments to that flow or the process based on new requirements or changes in your process, you don't need to touch the entire change process. You can focus on that specific component, making the maintenance a lot easier. The other thing to note about flow is that because they're modular, they can also be duplicated and reused for other change models. Oftentimes, you might have a flow that would be applicable to another model. You would just duplicate that, rename it, just so that you know kind of what you're using in that process, and you can maintain those separately. The last component or piece in this architecture is approval policies. So just like state-based flows, they're defined specific to a particular change model. So in this example here, we have a low-risk change model approval policy. And approval policies are called from within flows to check against the conditions defined in them. So they have a bunch of input parameters like change conflict data, risk data, operational data, engineering data. And from that data, they can make automated decisions over those governance decisions over those changes. Just like flows, approval policies can be duplicated and adjusted for particular use cases. So the best practice here is to maintain them at the change model level. I want to, at this point, acknowledge that for a lot of our longtime customers, this is a really great technology to use, and I think there's a lot of benefits to it. But I think something that we acknowledge that we haven't done the best job of is helping provide proper, utilities or tools or guidance on how to get there and do that transition. So that's what we're really trying to work on here in this presentation by giving you some initial recommendations. And then, like I said earlier, based on that maturity journey that I shared earlier, we're working on building out kind of more detailed prescriptive FAQs and guides on how to step through that maturity and help you get to a more modern change solution. All right, final slide for me here is just quickly summarizing again the benefits of moving from workflow to flow. So on the left, you'll see some of the challenges encountered with workflow. There's hidden logic in a large, complex, inflexible workflow, and ultimately it ends up serving as technical debt that blocks the use of newer capabilities. And on the right, you see the benefits of moving to models and flow. You have more modular components that are easy to be duplicated, they're easy to reuse, they're easy to modify, they're easy to test, they're easy to deploy, they're easier to maintain, and they're also easier to configure. Okay, that is the end of my section. I'm going to hand it over to Dan. Dan, I don't know if you want to answer any questions before you transition into the demo.
Come on, we're going to answer some of the demo. I've been answering questions as we've been going through. We have a quick look while we're doing that. Okay, we can leave these till the end now because I'm going to do some demo. And Kayla, maybe you can grab some while we're.
Yeah, I can look at that. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Cool. So looking at change models, Kayla, you gonna step through these slides. I'm gonna talk through them. Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
So we've got a normal change and a standard change, and we're aware of these things. We've got a lot of changes in normal, and normal is the catch-all, right? So normal is normally typically a complex process. And as Kayla showed on the previous slides, like there was a little like a section on the left-hand side where there was like an example workflow that was end-to-end for change. And really to fit that on and to show it, that isn't anywhere near as complex as the workflows that I've seen customers have for end-to-end change. I mean, one of the biggest things is like rollbacks between states and how you handle that. And there can be tons of logic, and I've seen them. They're truly scary when I look at some people's normal change process, and then handling all the different types of change within normal that go into the normal change process. So trying to push something through the normal change process also sometimes triggers things to happen that you don't want to happen for that type of change. It could be triggered to things like lead times or CAB, or if you're doing a DevOps change, quite often people place it into standard change, right? Or then we get into the paradigm of standard change, and standard change typically doesn't have any approval. It's something that's repeatable and low risk. So you want to be able to enable the organization to do this thing really fast using a template, using a very standard process. And you set up standard change templates, right? And like for here at ServiceNow, I think we're at 98% of our changes are standard changes, very, very fast changes using a template. But there is a ground in the middle, right? And we can move on to the transition here, Kaylin, right? Where we're thinking about things that are generally low risk. Okay, so you have something which, if you do it during a blackout window, you need an approval, right? Or if it's done to a critical system, right? Criticality 1 system, you need an approval. Or maybe if it's done in production, you need approval, sub-production doesn't. So now we get into slightly more complex things. And what we're doing is in there, and to answer one of the questions that came up really early on about data-driven change, what you would do with normal and standard change in that thing is you would allow the user at the start of the change process to decide, they've got a standard change, they want to do it, and they're going to follow this zero approval process using a template. And if it needs any approval, then it can't be templated. You can't use that process. It excludes it. So they follow the normal process. They have to fill in the form, or maybe they use a change template, but they're not quite as rich as standard change templates. If you use a low-risk change, what you can do is you can assess data on the change to see whether it needs to be routed for approval. So you can set up a low-risk change that most of the time goes through with no approval. Or if it's in a sub-production environment and you know that from your CMDB, then it would go through with no approval. Or maybe if it's during a blackout window or during a maintenance window, it has zero approval. If it's during normal business working times, then it requires a low level of approval. And if it's during a blackout window, then it requires exec approval. So what you can start to do is you can start routing more changes down this kind of gray area between standard change and normal change. So looking at low risk change and what the features of a low risk change are, you can use things for normal change. You can configure the state conditions, so the transitions between states. You can configure specifically for your low risk change. You can have an approval policy specifically for low risk change. You could have tasks for low risk change. Now, it's worth mentioning here that looking forward in releases, and we're looking at probably targeting Australia, but it may be a little later than that We're looking at opening up the ability to have a change template that looks like a standard change template for any model, right? So we're looking to be able to allow you to use the ability to propose a really good change as a template and then attach it to a certain model so that people can use templates and have tasks attached that get generated according to that template for any model they want. Just to clarify that, the template will be attached to a specific model, but as a change manager, you can set up templates for any model. So what that allows you to do is have highly templated changes that don't necessarily need zero approval, right? And having highly templated changes, you all tell me, customers tell me, is a really good thing, right? Having the ability to have this template out there in the catalog so someone can pick to do a network IP change on a firewall, or they can pick to do a certain server reboot, or they can pick to change a cache size of a database or something. It may be something that needs approval, but you want to template it. That's what would do in low risk change. Okay, so I've covered a couple of things there. One is that gray area between normal change and standard change. So not full approval for a normal change, not quite zero approval for a standard change, but maybe some edge cases you want to pick out that may require the change to be routed for approval. And the second thing is expansion of templates beyond just standard change. So you can propose, version, retire templates for models beyond standard change. Okay. I think that's what we're going to cover there. Okay, time for a live demo. And I haven't pre-canned any of this, so we're going to see how it goes. But we're going to have a quick look at creating a new change model in the starting place, which is in our Service Operations Workspace Admin Center. Let me share my screen. Okay. Demo should just be about 5 minutes. It's quite a quick demo. So I'm to my Service Operations Workspace Admin Center. For those of you who aren't aware this exists, if you go here, let's find it. You can see in here, I have a link to Service Operations Workspace Admin. And if I click on it, it takes me to this page. And you can see in here, there's areas you can go in and configure different bits of Service Operations Workspace. So Service Operations Workspace is where, modern net change, incident, some ITOM stuff, even lives. It allows people to work in a seamless way across ITSM processes. Everything I'm going to show you, and some of the screens I show you, are in a more traditional UI16, we call it, interface. But for the moment, I'm going to show you what we've done most recently because I'm a product manager. That's what I do. Okay. So in here, you can see we can make configurations to various things with the Service Ops Workspace. I'm going to go into change management. So I click on change management. And you can see in here, we have some suggestions, right? These are to tie in what we're doing with these things like launch and learns, live on ServiceNow events with our collateral. So it's kind of grouped and themed in the same way, so you can find your way around easier. But the first thing we would say to do is start looking at change models. And the reason we say start looking at change models is change model starts unlocking other things within the change process. So by moving towards change models, you can make your normal change simpler by taking changes out of it without actually touching the normal change at all. You can just make less changes, hit normal change. You can make the changes that were in normal change flow more efficiently, flow faster. You can report on them better. You can see what changes infrastructure are making by the model. And in future releases, you'll be able to have templates for that model, limited for use in that model. You'll be able to use data-driven approaches because within normal change, it's complex to kind of attach data because you don't always know what kind of thing will be going through. You don't know what to go to. With a model, you're able to specifically target certain types of data, like DevOps, right? You can start saying a DevOps change needs to have work items, it needs to have commits, it needs to have a pipeline, it needs to have artifacts. A normal change won't necessarily have those things. And trying to code in or configure the normal change process to sometimes need some things means it gets more and more and more overloaded and complex. How am I doing for time, Caitlin? Am I good?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. I'm talking more than I thought I would. Okay, so we're going to change models here. So in here, we have a list of our change models, and you can see in here, we've got Flow Designer as well. So we're giving you handy links to take you to the places you need to go and configure. And in here, we have change registration as an out-of-the-box model. We have cloud infrastructure, just some holding places out-of-the-box change models for you. And then we have our known and loved ITIL change types. We also have unauthorized change in there. I'll go into that one probably first. Okay, so if we look at what we've got in here, we can click on one and have a look at it. I'm going to set up a new one in a second, but I'm just going to look at this one first. So you'll notice we go back out of the workspace view into our UI 16 view, the one we used to for years and years. The reason for this is we have a slight technical limitation around how this list presents. We can't do it in workspace yet. We will get there. Okay. So the reason I'm pointing this out to you, unauthorized change is a really interesting case because we have a state flow. We're using states from the normal change process, but the changes already happened, so we need to authorize it, right? We don't have to assess the change. We don't have a new state. It's happened, right? So we want to authorize it, review it, and close it. If we had an emergency change, it might be quite a lot of you do this. Some of you might shout at me for saying this, but definitely quite a lot of you do this. For an emergency change, you do the change and then you authorize it. Or you go through a state of implementation and then you do authorization afterwards. So you can see we're using the same states in a lot of cases. We're just doing them in a different order or having less of them. Having less states makes us more efficient. Okay, the other really interesting thing about an unauthorized change in here is we have presets. The type, so in here, the type is set to emergency and unauthorized is set to true. This unauthorized is set to true means that every time this model is opened, the unauthorized flag is marked and the change is true. We know it's an unauthorized change. So these record presets in here, and I'll show you the configuration later, they're not to set values in the justification field, right? They're not to fill in the short description. They're not like a change template. They're to fill in values that you know will be true for that change all the time. An unauthorized change will always have its unauthorized flag set as true. Okay, so it's kind of process-based things rather than content. Templates control content, models control process, basically. Okay, I'm going to go into a new one now. So let's go into here. I'm going to open a new change. Okay, I'll show you how easy it is, hopefully. So if I go in here, I'm going to go with, let's call it 4. Okay, and I'm going to say this change to change. And in here, we have a type. The type, if you notice here, is set to model. That's really important. If I drop this down, you can see the type field is being set here, right? So we have of the change a model field. The model in this one would be core info. We also have a type field. For normal changes, the model is normal, the type is normal. For standard, the type is standard, the model is standard. So you can see they're kept in parity that way. If we're using a custom model, we set the type to model. That will become more apparent exactly why we do that later, but it's to do with your trigger conditions. It's so that we can say, it's so that you don't have changes being picked up as the type is normal when the model is infra, right? So it's important to note that. When we have our own changes, we would recommend that you set the type to model. This is something we dropped into the platform about a year ago. Okay. In here as well, I'm not going to set any other record presets. We have security on the record too. So in here, we have the ability to say who can use this change, who can read it, and then who can administer this change model as well. We can set them in here with simple lists. I'm just going to submit the change first. So save it. And you can see in here now, I've got the advanced security button ticked, and we can also use something called user criteria, a bit beyond the scope of this, but this allows you to have more complex queries around who can write to the change and who can read the change. Your technical people will help you with that. Okay. So what you would do is you'd pick in that list something like all infra engineers, and there's somebody in the background, one of your technical people would have already set up the user criteria for you. They're used across the platform. Okay. So model states. What we're going to do is we're going to add some new model states. Now, the model states allow you to pick from a set of states. These can be configured. We don't normally find people need to go much beyond these, right? So normally, typically, I should say, the states we have are a subset of the normal change state. So I'm going to go new. We have a new state. We'll get to the initial state. Okay, and I'm going to submit that. You can see we now have a new state, and I'm going to go a new one, and I'm going to pick authorize. Okay. I think you get the picture. So I'm going to just add one more. I'm going to review it and then close it. Review. So what this is doing is it's picking from a list of predefined states. Again, you can configure that list. You can configure this list here if you want to. But normally you would pick one from these because normally we follow the same path. I'm going to put cancelled in as well, just for the sake of completeness. And you can see they have a sequence as well. That's the order they flow in. So what we've done here is there's no flow attached to this change at the moment, right? We haven't configured any flow to fire when this change fires, but we have a set of states configured for the change. And what we can do in here is we can configure model state transition. So we've got our states and we can configure what state we can move to and from, and without the need for any flow. From new to authorized, it's an automatic transition. I have to save it first before I get options there. Okay, and then we can set a condition. Again, we're going into the weeds a bit here, and technical people may want to help you with this, but this is as well something that maybe the slightly more technical or slightly more ServiceNow savvy change managers can set up, especially using the examples we've got. So you can have in here transitions, and you can set what fields need to be mandatory for the change to move on, or say when a field is populated, the change will automatically move out the new state. So when you filled in the short description, justification, backup plan, and you've put a CR on the form and an assignment group, it will automatically move from new to authorized. Or you can say, until you fill this thing in, you can't move from new to authorized. So, and you can also do it with scripts. Again, if you want to write some Java, you want to go and call out to a different system or call an API or something like that, it's all in there for you. Probably a bit beyond scope of this book. I'm not going to add a transition condition into this one at the moment. We don't really need to. Am I good for time, Caelan?
Yeah, you have maybe finish this up just so we can do the other demo.
Yeah, okay, I'll finish it there. Okay, so we have set up our change now. And what we need to do now is we need to attach a process beyond the state transitions to this change. Okay, so we've set up the change, core infra, we've given it a set of states. These states are specific to infra now. We've kind of copied them into infra. So when we set up a state transition on these, that transition will be specific to the core infra change. We've set up the preset, so the type is model, and the name is infra. And if I now update that change, we should have it in our list. So if I go into here, and refresh, hopefully, I said it was active. I don't know whether I said it was active or not. Okay, more infra, there we are. So we've got the change now available. It's not active yet because we're still developing it. We haven't attached a flow, right? We can make that active and then we can start using our workflow. Okay, like I remember from the start of the demo, was I going to show flow in here as well?
Here, yes, I think it's worth showing you.
So what you've got now is your set of flows. What I did to get here is I clicked on this open flow designer, but I actually just applied a quick filter on it as well to make things faster for us. So you can see in here, I've actually filtered it down to just show the change flows. And you can see that previously we had end-to-end flows for change. So change standard is an end-to-end flow for standard change. But we also have these state-based flows. So if we want to have an authorize, if we want to use the authorized flow, and I'll click into it, you can see here that we have a flow, right, for authorize. And so this flow will fire when the trigger condition is set, and it will take care of authorization for us. What we can do is we can either use this flow for our infra change, if we want to use exactly the same process for authorize as we do for normal, or we can copy it. I think it's in here. No, we can copy this flow and edit it to use it as a starting point. And inside this flow, we have the change approval policy. So this is where we take our policy inputs and we approve the change. So the components we've got here are the model and the states and the state transitions. We showed them earlier. We've got the flow that will fire for that change. And we're going to cover the trigger conditions of this later. And then we've got approval policies, which have been called by the flow. Generally, what you do in flow for change is called approval policies. So the example we've got here is we can copy this change normal authorized flow, and we can call a different approval policy in it for infra. It may be that we need to check slightly different things for infra, or we need to route it slightly differently. We can have a flow that calls that specific approval policy, does things slightly differently. So what we're doing with the models is we're controlling the process that the change follows. We're not controlling the content, controlling the process. Have I covered everything, Caelan? I don't have the slide in front of me. I have my screen.
Yeah, I think you have.
Okay, cool. Do you want to take over?
Yes, I will share recap. Okay, so in that demo that Dan just walked through, he walked through, kind of creating a change model end to end and all the different components and modular pieces that fit together that make that work. And this is for the low risk use case. He showed about the access controls that you can define within the model, the state-based flow that you saw in Flow Designer there for relevant stages within the model, and also the approval policies that you can call from within those models.
There's a question earlier, and I just worth answering it here. The interaction with flow, who configures that? Who makes it? That's an admin, right, or a technical person. So this screen, this flow, we wouldn't expect change managers to be going to do this. You have a very limited number of flows, right? And we would expect you to reuse them across models. If you need a new flow and you need something slightly different, it would be a story that you raise with your developers, your engineers, your admins to do. Change managers configuring the models, I would say that's within the realms of what most change managers may want to attempt to do. But again, you may want to get your admins to do that for you. It's up to your governance model. You need to talk to your platform.
Yeah, good point. All right, Dan's got one more quick demo about talking about transitioning from types to models and some considerations and things and helpful things that we've built for you to do that. So take it away, Dan. Just take a
Okay.
few minutes here if you
Yeah,
can, so we
I'm
can get to
gonna
some
be quick.
questions.
So I think
Yeah.
am I still sharing my screen, Kayla? I don't think you took over.
Don't let me stop sharing. Now you are. Yeah.
Okay. So in here, you can see we've got a trigger on our flow. And what we're doing is we're triggering this normal authorized flow to fire in certain states. So when the state is authorized and the model is normal. If we wanted this to trigger for more than one type of model of change, we would need to add in an additional criterion there. So we could do or model is, and then I can pick my change out of the list. These enter a lot. Right, I can pick one there. I couldn't find the one I did earlier. So I think maybe because it's not active. So in here, we're firing this when it's normal or standard change. The important thing to note here is that this can work with you or against you, right? So a lot of you at the moment have workflows that fire, and they will be triggered on the type of change. So you need to, now we have the type is equal to model. We've got that additional choice in the type field. We can set the type to model. That means that when you create your own models, the type will be set to model, and the out-the-box configuration for end-to-end flows for all the traditional legacy change bits will not fire because the type is not normal anymore. The type is model. You need to check those conditions. So you need to check the conditions on the workflow to make sure that you don't get normal change workflow firing when you set up your new model. It may be that you haven't adopted that yet. You haven't got changes with type model. It may be you're on an older version platform. You don't have that choice. You can add it yourself. We recommend you upgrading rather than do that, but if you need to, you can. The same thing happens if I look in here. If I look in the change request list, this is again something that admins would do, but you need to tell your admins to go through and have a look at things like business rules. Because business rules have conditions on them too. And it may be that you want to apply these business rules to models. Okay, and if we look here, it will pop up. You can see in here, we've got where the type is standard. Okay, so this will only fire where the type is standard. You may want it to fire for other models, you may not. But it's worth going in and just getting someone to analyze your business rules and analyze your workflows at the start. And for the existing logic that you've got, just make sure it complies with what you can do with models. So make sure it's using the type field to set the change appropriately, or making sure that when you have new business rules that you put in, that the conditions will cater for models. So you can see in here, we could change this one simply by doing model, and then we can pick standard in there instead. Now, the actual implementation of how this is done is probably a little bit technical, right? But once you've done it once, right? Once you've gone through and had a look at the business rules and make sure they only fire for normal changes, or they only fire for standard changes, or they only fire for emergency changes, once you've assured yourself of that, because when you set up your new models, you have the type is equal to model, they will be in their own area, right? You can play with them, you can use them. The existing logic, the existing workflows, the existing flows will not fire. But it's worth upfront just making sure that you understand these trigger conditions and how they work. Okay, then.
All right. So as a quick recap of that, Dan chatted about some of the things that you can modify within Flow and also the business rules that you should check to transition from having them trigger off of type to model. Um, and there's probably some other things that we didn't have a chance to get to, but we'll have those in subsequent how-to videos that we're planning to work on as well. Just for the sake of time, want to get to this recommended path on migrating to models. Dan, do you want to walk through this one, or you want me to walk through it?
I can do it. So yeah, so start using the model field for your logic, for your flows, for your workflows. Like I say, that we have kind of future-proofed it. We have had a guardrail by having the type is equal to model, but just start using the model field for more logic going forward, because the model will be the field that you use in the future. Okay, so start replacing the type condition as you go through. When you have new business rules or when you revisit business rules, make your devs aware that you're using the model field now. And then what you can do is you can experiment and learn with new change models, right? It could be that infra change that I set up there. You just allow it to be used by 10 engineers in infra to start off with, to raise a few changes on firewalls and some production, to see how it goes, to make sure the flow works. You could then expand that and allow them to do production changes using it. Once you're happy with how that cohort is working with that change and that it works well, you can then scale it out and start using it, say, across all of infra. But you don't have to be everywhere all at once. Okay, you can keep your normal change working. You can give this special new model to a few people using that user criteria or using the access conditions. Allow them to use it, experiment with it, white glove support, and then when you're happy with it, you can scale the adoption. Using state transitions is really useful. So using state transitions makes your flow less complex. You don't have to code those into the flow anymore. They're encapsulated in the state itself. They're really easy to see. They're point and click. So start replacing logic and workflows with state transitions, or start building new flows that have state transitions in instead of having it in the workflow. And then use the state-based flows as well, because having a flow per state makes that particular flow reusable across many different models. It means you don't have to have rollback conditions between different states. It means that when someone needs to make a change to that flow, they're only possibly affecting that state. They're not potentially affecting every state for all of normal change. So it's more granular, it's more secure, and it's a more efficient way of working. Okay, Caleb.
Right.
Oh,
Right.
compatibility mode.
Mhm.
Look on our doc site for compatibility mode. We have something called compatibility mode. It allows you to work in mixed ways. It's beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. But if you are interested, have a look on the doc site. I'm sorry we couldn't cover it today.
All right, I know we only have 2 minutes. I want to quickly flash this call to action, asking you all to, start experimenting with some of these modern change features that we talked about today, particularly models. You can do that subprod. The nice thing about models is you can actually begin testing that with specific teams in production if you're comfortable with that as well. We have a launch and learn series that we'll link out to in this document. Please review that if you want to learn more about models, flow, approval policies, risk. We have a session on all of those things, as well as some helpful blogs here. In the last minute, I have a couple questions that I've teed up to ask Dan live. The first set of questions are from Aaron. I'm going to start with his second question because I think it's probably the most relevant. Is there any guidance on what to consider a low risk change? I'm challenged with educating practitioners on ITIL changes, and I'm concerned about how they would consider what's low risk.
Yeah, so I would say that anything that needs an approval, right, that can be highly templated is highly repeatable. So a low risk change is something that may have to have some guardrails applied. So if you, like I said, if you have something like maintenance schedules or you're using blackout schedules and you want to check them, so it allows you to take a more data-driven approach to standard changes. So kind of think along the same lines of standard change. Think about the changes that you couldn't put into standard change because they sometimes need approval. Think about the things that are in standard change, and probably if you're being honest about it, they should need approval sometimes. Think about standard changes that fail, right, that cause failure or impact, and so they're taken out of standard change and put into normal change there. They're all really good candidates. And also going forward, we should have, with the AI-based approaches we're using for change, we're developing ways of identifying these types of changes, these groupings of changes. So when you get a cluster of changes being made, you get something that's being used frequently and is repeatable, and it shows as low risk, the system will cluster it and suggest you create a model. That's where you'd be looking at maybe having a low risk change model for it.
Yeah. Great answer. Second question is around, is there a reason templates aren't built into the playbook experience? Do we see a future where that overlap may happen?
Possibly, it's a big question. We're not thinking at the moment of using playbook in change. We may do that. There are some opportunities with AI and playbook, but it's beyond the scope. Really.
Okay. And then the last question I have here is from Brian. He's asking for any tips that we can provide to troubleshoot should a change not transition as expected. He has this challenge with workflow. He's trying to get started with flow. Just any tips?
If you are getting problems with the change not transitioning as expected, then raise a case with support and it will probably come my way. So if it's not working as expected, ServiceNow support will triage that and make sure it's not working. It's working as they will make sure it's working within the bounds and have a look. And if there is something odd happening, then we will have a look at it for you. I'm not aware of anything there, but yeah, open a case for support or talk to your partner or expert services team.
Okay. All right, we are 2 minutes past. Thank you, Dan, for the great demos. Thank you, everybody, for attending.
Aaron, feel free to drop me an email if you want on that.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.